The observation lounge on Deck 41 of Coppervane Station had been rented for the evening, and somebody had spent enough credits to make the whole place look like a crystal tumor growing inside a jewelry box. Petra Millbrook sat in the corner nearest the emergency exit, old habit from 43 years of running a shop in a tin can floating between star systems, and watched her daughter's friends coo over decorations that cost more than most dock workers earned in a quarter cycle. Everything was draped in synthetic silks that shifted between pearl and champagne depending on the angle. Clusters of fabricated crystals jutted from the tables like mineral deposits in a cave nobody asked for. The caterers, two Shanari in matching uniforms, their chemical light patterns dimmed to a polite professional hum, circulated trays of sculpted gelatin towers and miniature savory bites arranged in geometric spirals. Nobody was eating. Eating would ruin the aesthetic. Petra was 71 years old, human down to her bones, and she had stopped caring about aesthetics around the same time her knees started predicting weather changes in the station's climate systems. She wore a brown wool jacket over a floral blouse, flat shoes with actual rubber soles, and her white hair was pinned up in a bun so tight it could survive depressurization. She looked exactly like what she was, an old shopkeeper from the mid-ring commercial district who smelled faintly of textile starch and strong coffee. Her daughter, Solveig Sorene, née Millbrook, sat enthroned in the center of the room on a curved chaise that probably had its own product catalogue entry. Solveig was 34, half human and half Shanari, and tonight she had leaned hard into the Shanari half. She wore a form-fitting gown of deep teal that clung to her frame like liquid night, shot through with lines of chemiluminescent threading that pulsed softly in rhythm with her heartbeat. The Shanari called this style vein sans couture, fabric designed to sync with the wearer's biological light patterns. On Solveig, whose skin carried the faint prismatic circuit markings she had inherited from her father's species, the effect was striking. Her dark hair was swept back from a face that was almost human, except for the slightly too large eyes and the subtle luminous tracery that ran along her jaw and down her neck, like decorative wiring. Solveig was surrounded by 6 other women, 5 full-blooded Shanari, and 1 human who had clearly spent a fortune trying to look like one. They all had the height, the elongated fingers with that extra joint, the digitigrade legs that gave them the look of walking perpetually on tiptoe. Their skin patterns flickered and danced in conversational wavelengths that Petra had never learned to read. After 10 years of her daughter being married to a Shanari, Petra still could not tell the difference between their pattern for delighted and their pattern for I am judging you so hard right now. Gavrik Sorene, Petra's son-in-law, stood behind his wife's chair like a decorative column. Tall, angular, his skin a pale slate blue with silver patterns running in precise geometric lines, the mark of old Shanari money, she'd been told, though she suspected that was the kind of thing people said to make genetics sound like an achievement. He worked as a senior credit assessor at Vantage Financial Group, which was a fancy way of saying he decided which people deserved loans and which ones could go pound sand. He held a flute of sparkling something or other and nodded at everything anyone said with the practiced attentiveness of a man who had mastered looking busy while doing absolutely nothing. The gift opening had begun. Each present emerged from its wrapping to a chorus of exaggerated gasps. A temperature-regulating bassinet liner from Galactica Infantile, the most exclusive baby brand in 4 systems, drew actual applause. A set of microfiber sleep suits with embedded biometric monitors, also Galactica, prompted one of the Shanari women to clutch her chest as though she might faint from the sheer glamour. A pair of shoes the size of Petra's thumb, made from synthetic polymer that allegedly adapted to the infant's foot growth, got passed around the circle like a religious artifact. Petra watched all of this from her corner and nursed a glass of water. Beside her, occupying a seat designed for someone twice his size, was Gorbo Tech. Gorbo was a Fettucci, 3 feet tall, roughly spherical, covered in dense auburn fur that made him look like an ambulatory coconut. He had 3 amber eyes arranged in a triangle on his flat face, a wide mouth that could unhinge to consume noodles at a rate that defied physics, and stubby legs that ended in feet so wide they functioned as their own snowshoes. He ran a noodle cart on level 12, directly across from Petra's textile shop, and he had been her best friend for 19 years. "This is disgusting," Gorbo whispered, his wide mouth barely moving. He had smuggled in a thermos of his own broth and was taking furtive sips. "They're clapping for shoes, Petra. Shoes, for a creature that won't walk for 14 months. "Hush," Petra said, but she did not disagree. "And what's with the crystals? You know those are just compressed station waste with a coat of resin, right? I saw Malkovich from level 8 selling the same ones for 12 credits a kilo last week. She's got them arranged like they're crown jewels." "Gorbo, I'm just saying. If my daughter threw a party this pretentious, I would eat my own cart." Petra almost smiled, almost. The event coordinator, a young Shanari woman with a headset and a clipboard that projected holographic checklists, picked up Petra's gift from the table. It was wrapped in plain brown textile paper, the kind Petra used at the copper thimble for wrapping fabric bolts. She had tied it with a length of genuine Terran silk ribbon, cream-colored and slightly lustrous, that she had kept in the shop's back room for 30 years. Inside were 3 thermal wraps she had woven by hand over the past 4 months, soft, dense, made from a blend of Terran alpaca fiber and Brevian silkworm thread that she had imported at considerable expense. The material had a natural warm glow under station lighting, something between gold and candlelight, and it was hypoallergenic across 11 known species profiles, including Shanari human hybrids. Each wrap carried a different pattern, one in ivory, one in pale amber, one in seafoam, and each stitch held approximately 4 months of early mornings, sore fingers, and the kind of stubborn love that does not know when to quit. On the main gift table near the entrance, she had also placed a sealed envelope. Thick, cream-colored, with her personal wax stamp on the back, a small copper thimble, the same logo she had used on her shop signage since before Solveig was born. Inside that envelope was a data chip containing the transfer authorization for 800,000 Galactic Standard credits, earmarked for a custodial education trust in the baby's name. It was the product of 43 years of selling thread, buttons, zippers, and interfacing by the meter, and of buying, one by one, the 6 commercial docking modules on level 12 that now housed a pharmacy chain, 2 restaurants, a Vantage financial branch office, and a Shanari import boutique. Nobody, not Solveig, not Gavrik, not any of the luminous women in this room, knew that Petra Millbrook owned the floor they were standing on, figuratively, and in several cases, literally. "This one is from your mother," the coordinator said into the amplification mic, and the room went politely quiet. Solveig took the package. Petra watched her daughter's face change the moment she felt the brown paper under her manicured fingers. The shift was microscopic, but total. A tightening around the mouth, a dimming of her chemical light patterns from social warmth to something cooler and harder. She pulled the ribbon without care, tore the paper, and lifted the first thermal wrap from the box. The golden glow of the alpaca silk blend caught the light beautifully. Several of the Shanari women leaned forward with genuine curiosity. Even their skin patterns flickered in what Petra was fairly sure was appreciation. Solveig held it up between 2 elongated fingers, like she was handling a dead insect. "Mum?" Her voice came through the amplification system, crisp and carrying. Every person in the room heard it. "What is this?" "Thermal wraps for the baby," Petra said from her seat, keeping her voice steady. "Hand-woven. The fiber is a Terran alpaca blend, hypoallergenic, breathable, naturally temperature-regulating. I had the silkworm thread imported from—" "Hand-woven." Solveig repeated the word the way someone might say disease-ridden. She pulled out the second wrap, the amber one, and let it dangle. "These are handmade." "Yes." "Mum, my baby is only going to wear Galactica brand. Do you understand, Galactica? Not whatever this is." She waved the wrap vaguely. "This looks like something from a swap market on a mining platform. This is embarrassing." The room had gone funeral silent. Even the caterers stopped moving. Gorbo's thermos froze halfway to his mouth. Solveig dropped all 3 wraps onto the floor beside her chair. Not onto the table, not back into the box. Onto the floor, in a heap, like rags tossed toward a laundry chute. One of the Shanari women covered her mouth with her long fingers. Another looked away. Gavrik took a sip of his drink and studied the ceiling. "I told you, Mom. I told you what kind of things we needed. I sent you the registry link. Galactica has a whole line for mixed-species infants, but you had to do your little craft project instead. Solvay's chemical light lines pulsed in sharp, irritated patterns. Please, just stop trying to make your old-fashioned shop stuff part of my life. It's not who I am anymore. Petra sat very still. The water glass in her hand did not tremble. Gorbo was vibrating beside her, literally vibrating, which Fettucci did when they were furious, producing a low hum like an overloaded transformer. "Let me eat her," Gorbo whispered through clenched teeth. "I'm small, but I'm persistent. I'll start with the shoes." "No," Petra said quietly. She set her water glass on the side table. She stood up. Her knees protested as they always did, but her back was straight and her face was a closed door. She walked across the polished floor of the observation lounge, past the gelatin towers and the crystal decorations, and stopped in front of her daughter's chair. Solvay looked up at her with an expression halfway between defiance and the faintest ghost of guilt. Petra bent down slowly. Her hands, rough, scarred from decades of scissors and sewing needles and the edges of fabric bolts, picked up the ivory wrap first, then the amber, then the seafoam. She shook each one gently, folded them with the precise, unhurried movements of a woman who had folded 10,000 bolts of cloth in her lifetime, and placed them back in the box. She put the lid on. "You're right, Solvay," she said, and her voice was so calm it made the air in the room feel thin. "These aren't for you." She turned and walked toward the exit. As she passed the main gift table, her eyes found the cream-colored envelope with the copper thimble seal. It sat undisturbed among the holographic gift cards and the branded Galactica bags. Nobody had opened it. Nobody had any reason to think it mattered. Petra picked it up, slipped it into the inside pocket of her wool jacket and kept walking. The observation lounge doors hissed open, then closed behind her. The last thing she heard before the soundproofing kicked in was Gorbo's voice, carrying with the peculiar resonance of a Fettucci who had abandoned all pretense of whispering, "That noodle cart of mine. It's worth more than every dress in this room combined. And the noodles are better company." The corridor outside was cool and hummed, with the baseline vibration of Copper Vein Station's life support. Petra held the box against her chest and walked toward the transit hub. Her face showed nothing. Inside, the machinery was already turning. She had spent 43 years building something out of thread and patience and the kind of stubbornness that outlasts fashion seasons and economic downturns and the slow erosion of a daughter's respect. Solvay thought she was a relic. Gavrik thought she was furniture. Neither of them had ever bothered to wonder how a woman who sold buttons for a living owned a colonial-era apartment in the station's historic core, or why the bank manager on level 12 called her Mrs. Millbrook, with the particular deference reserved for clients who could, if they chose, buy the building. The transit pod carried her home in 6 minutes. Her apartment was on the inner ring of the station's original hull, high ceilings, real wood paneling salvaged from the colony ship that had seeded the station 2 centuries ago, a small garden alcove where she grew actual ferns under UV lamps. She locked the door, set the box on her dining table, and sat down in her reading chair. She took the envelope from her jacket. She broke the copper thimble seal and removed the data chip. She held it up to the lamp. 800,000 credits, enough to fund a child's education from nursery through postgraduate, with enough left over for a housing deposit. It represented decades of rent collected, of repair costs absorbed, of maintenance budgets balanced on the back of a woman who could do arithmetic faster than any spreadsheet. She snapped the chip between her thumb and forefinger. It broke cleanly like a wafer. She dropped the pieces into the waste receptacle under her desk. Then she brewed a cup of ginger tea, real ginger, not the synthesized dust they sold in the upper ring cafes, and called Aldous Pemwick. Aldous was 78, human, and had been her legal counsel since his father retired. He answered on the second ring despite the late hour, because Aldous understood that when Petra Millbrook called outside business hours, the universe was about to rearrange itself. "Aldous, I need you at your office at 0700 tomorrow. Bring the property files, the trust structures, and the usufruct contracts. All of them. Every single one. We're doing renovations." She disconnected before he could ask what kind. Gorbo showed up at her door 40 minutes later, fur bristling, carrying a container of emergency noodles. "I brought sustenance," he announced, waddling past her into the kitchen. "Also emotional support. Also a plan to release 12 kilos of live guppies into Solvay's apartment ventilation system. The guppies are optional, but strongly recommended. No guppies, Gorbo." "Petra, she threw your work on the floor. On the floor, in front of people. I've seen dock workers with better manners, and I once watched a dock worker eat a sandwich he dropped in a coolant puddle. He clambered onto a kitchen stool, his stubby legs dangling. You're not going to just sit here and take it, are you?" "I'm not going to sit here and take it, but I'm also not going to release guppies. What I am going to do requires paperwork." "Paperwork?" Gorbo's 3 eyes blinked in sequence, left, right, center, which was the Fatuki equivalent of extreme skepticism. "The woman humiliates you in front of her whole fancy clique, and your revenge is paperwork. The most dangerous weapon on any station isn't a blaster, Gorbo. It's a notarized document." Gorbo considered this while slurping noodles. "That's either the most terrifying or the most boring thing you've ever said, and I genuinely cannot tell which." At 0700 the next morning, Petra sat across from Aldous Pemwick in his cluttered office on level 9. She wore a charcoal suit she reserved for contract negotiations, low heels, and a small brooch on her lapel, a copper thimble, the logo of her shop. Aldous spread the files across his desk with the methodical care of a man who charged by the hour, but had long ago stopped billing this particular client for anything less than affection. "First," Petra said, "revoke the usufruct agreement on Unit 14A Prism Tower. That apartment goes onto a standard commercial lease at full market rate, effective next month. Second, cancel the automatic maintenance payments I've been covering. Third," she placed a platinum credit extension card on his desk, "this line of credit, which Solvay has been using for what she calls emergencies and what I call shopping sprees, gets terminated today." Aldous removed his glasses, cleaned them, and put them back on. "Petra, that apartment at market rate, Gavrick's salary won't cover half of it. They'll have to move." "I'm aware. And the credit line, I know for a fact Solvay has been using it for everything from restaurant bills to that Galactica infantile registry I'm aware of that too." Aldous studied her face for a long moment. He had known her since she was 53, when she walked into his father's office with the deed to her first commercial property and the calm demeanor of someone who had been rehearsing for this level of wealth her entire life. He had never seen her make a rash decision. "There's more," Petra continued. "I want my entire investment portfolio, every credit, every bond, every property title, transferred into a blind trust administered by your firm. If something happens to me, Solvay inherits nothing directly. Everything goes through the trust under conditions I will dictate." "And those conditions?" "We'll draft them next week. For now, just make sure the walls go up. I don't want Gavrick anywhere near my account numbers. He's been collecting bonuses advantage for managing my funds in his portfolio. That arrangement ends today." Aldous exhaled slowly. "She's going to call me, probably screaming." "Probably. You may want to adjust your calm volume." The machinery engaged with bureaucratic precision. By noon, the credit extension was dead. By 1400 hours, a courier drone had delivered a sealed document packet to the reception desk at Prism Tower, a contract of commercial tenancy with a monthly figure that would make Gavrick's left eye twitch. By 1600 hours, Petra had visited the branch manager at Vantage Financial on level 12, her own commercial property, a fact Gavrick had never registered, and transferred her entire portfolio out of his reach. She did not stop at Gavrick's desk on the way out, but she made sure he saw her descending from the manager's office. The look on his face was worth every step on her aching knees. Gorbo, who had insisted on accompanying her as tactical support, waited outside Vantage's doors with his noodle cart strategically positioned to block the main entrance. "Well?" he asked as Petra emerged. "It's done." "Did you see his face?" "I couldn't see from here, but Malkovich's daughter was inside getting a loan and she said his whole pattern went grey." "Grey, Petra. Shenari only go grey when they think they're about to die or when they've eaten bad shellfish." "Gorbo, move your cart. You're blocking a fire lane." "I'm blocking his escape route is what I'm doing. Strategic positioning. I learned it from a documentary about siege warfare." "Move the cart." The calls began that evening. Petra had disconnected her apartment comm unit. The satisfying click of the hardline separating from its port was, she decided, one of the better sounds she had heard in recent years. Her personal communicator sat on the kitchen counter, volume muted. The screen flickered with incoming attempts, 5 from Solveig, 3 from Gavrik, 1 from a number she didn't recognize that turned out to be Solveig using a friend's device. She listened to the messages the next morning while eating breakfast. The first was fury, Solveig demanding to know what was wrong with the credit line, treating Petra like a malfunctioning appliance that needed customer service. The second was panic. Solveig had received the tenancy documents and was sputtering about Aldous making catastrophic errors. The third was Gavrik, his voice stripped of its usual boardroom polish, trying to explain that the documents must be a mistake, while simultaneously asking if Petra had really pulled her investments from Vantage, because his section chief was asking questions he could not answer. The fourth message was Solveig crying. Petra turned off the communicator and watered her ferns. 2 days later, Gavrik intercepted her outside the transit hub on level 12. He was still in his work suit, an expensive one, she noted, that cost more than a month of dock worker wages, but the collar was loose, and there were shadows under his large Shinari eyes that hadn't been there at the party. "Petra, we need to talk about this," he said, falling into step beside her. His chemical light patterns were cycling through what she guessed was distress, though on him it could also be indigestion. "Solveig's been trying to reach you. The credit line is down. The tenancy contract is— Look, the rent figure on that document is insane. My salary doesn't cover that, not even close." "Then find a place your salary does cover. You can't be serious. She's 8 weeks from delivery. This is about the sweaters, isn't it? The thermal wraps. The party. She was emotional. Mixed species pregnancies amplify hormonal responses. It's documented." "Don't hide behind her hormones, Gavrik. She was cruel and you stood there sipping champagne and looking at the ceiling like it owed you money." Petra stopped walking and faced him. He was a full foot taller than her, but she had spent decades looking up at warehouse shelving and bank managers, and life itself. Height meant nothing. "That apartment is my property. You've been living there rent-free for 7 years because I signed a usufruct agreement as a wedding gift. I never transferred the title because, and I'm being honest with you for the first time since we met, I never trusted either of you to handle a real asset." "Petra, your bonuses at Vantage. You know where those came from. My portfolio, parked in your branch so you could collect management fees on money you didn't earn, invested by a woman you looked down on at every family dinner. That arrangement is over. Your branch manager knows. I'm guessing he's already reassigned your desk." Gavrik's patterns went grey. Gorbo had been right about the color. "Find a 2-bedroom in the mid-ring," Petra said, adjusting her jacket. "Millions of families raise children there. The schools are decent. The air's the same processed mix we all breathe. Your child will be fine." She walked away. Behind her, she heard Gavrik say her name once more, but it came out thin and deflated like air leaking from a punctured suit. Gorbo was waiting at his noodle cart with a bowl already prepared. "Extra pepper," he said, pushing it across the counter. "For the soul. My grandmother always said spicy food after a confrontation prevents spiritual constipation." "Your grandmother was a noodle vendor on a freighter, Gorbo. And she died spiritually unconstipated, so maybe she knew something." Despite everything, Petra laughed. It was a small dry sound, like a hinge that hadn't moved in years, but it was real. The meeting at Aldous' office happened 3 days later. Petra arrived 15 minutes early and took the chair at the head of the conference table. Aldous arranged 3 leather folders in front of her, financial summaries, property deeds, and the document she had specifically requested, a notarized reproduction of the destroyed data chip's contents, showing the original 800,000 credit transfer authorization. Solveig and Gavrik arrived exactly on time, which told Petra they had rehearsed this. Her daughter wore a designer maternity tunic, still expensive but wrinkled, grabbed in haste. Her chemical light patterns were dim and erratic. Her eyes were swollen. Gavrik had abandoned the power suit for something more modest, though his shoes still probably cost more than Gorbo's entire cart. "Mom?" Solveig moved toward her with arms open, tears already forming. Petra raised one hand, palm out. "Sit down, we're reviewing documents, not performing for an audience." That stopped her daughter cold. The ghost of guilt that had flickered at the party was now a full haunting. Solveig sat, Gavrik sat beside her, jaw tight, fingers interlaced on the table. "Aldous, give them folder 1. The lawyer slid the financial summary across the table. Gavrik opened it, and his extra-jointed fingers went rigid. It was a side-by-side comparison, his actual income from Vantage versus the real cost of maintaining their lifestyle in Prism Tower. The deficit column was printed in red, and it ran off the bottom of the page. "For 7 years," Petra said, "I have paid for the ground you walk on, the apartment, the maintenance fees, the credit line your wife used to buy baby shoes that cost more than some people's monthly food budget, the investment portfolio you parked in your branch to inflate your performance metrics. I subsidized your career, Gavrik. Every bonus you bragged about at dinner was earned with my money and my patience." Gavrik said nothing. There was nothing to say. Numbers did not negotiate. "It's my home, Mum," Solveig whispered, gripping her belly. "You gave it to us. I lent it to you. The title is in my name. It has always been in my name because I knew, somewhere in the back of my skull, underneath all the hoping and excusing and telling myself you'd grow out of it, I knew you weren't ready." Aldous folder 2. The second folder contained the reproduction of the destroyed transfer chip's data, the authorization screen showing the amount, the designated recipient, the purpose code marked Custodial Education Trust. Solveig looked at it. Her breath stopped. Her patterns went completely dark for 2 full seconds. The Shannari biological equivalent of a system crash. 800,000 credits, Petra said. "That was in the envelope I left on the gift table next to the thermal wraps you threw on the floor. It was the real gift. A trust fund for your child's education. Enough to carry him from nursery through any university in 4 systems, with housing money left over." "Where?" Gavrik leaned forward, eyes wide, patterns cycling through something Petra had never seen before, a Shannari kaleidoscope of greed and horror. "Where is this chip now?" "In my waste receptacle, in 8 pieces." Solveig made a sound that was not quite human and not quite Shannari, a keening, fractured noise that seemed to come from somewhere below language. She pressed both hands over her mouth. The tears came hard and ugly, streaking her face, and this time there was no performance in them. This was the sound of someone watching a bridge collapse that she herself had set on fire. "So you had a box wrapped in plain paper," Petra said, and her voice did not waver, though something behind her ribs was being slowly compressed. "And you saw poverty. You had an envelope with no brand name on it, and you assumed it was worthless. You tore down your mother in front of 50 people to win the approval of women who wouldn't cross a corridor to help you carry groceries. And in doing so, you tore up your own child's future." She paused. "I can't put that chip back together, Solveig. Some things once broken stay broken." The silence in the room lasted long enough for Petra to hear the climate system cycling through its rhythm. "Here are the terms," she said. "Everything I own is now in a blind trust. You cannot access it. You will pay market rent or vacate my property within 30 days. There will be no credit extensions, no emergency loans, no invisible subsidies. You are, as of this meeting, financially independent. Congratulations." She stood, smoothed her jacket, and turned to leave. At the door she paused. "When my grandchild is born, I will come to see him. And when I do, I will bring those 3 thermal wraps. I suggest you keep them." She did not explain why. Let them figure it out. The 30 days that followed were, for Petra, something close to resurrection. She repotted her ferns. She reorganized the back room of the Copper Thimble. She ate dinner with Gorbo 3 times a week, and he told her increasingly elaborate stories about his plans to franchise his noodle cart into what he called a culinary empire that will make Galactica Infantile look like a lemonade stand. "I'm serious, Petra. Gorbo's Galactic Noodle Emporium. I've got a business plan. It's on a napkin, but it's a very detailed napkin." "You spelled emporium wrong on the napkin, Gorbo. Spelling is for people who don't have vision." Through Aldous, she learned that Solveig and Gavrik had moved out of Prism Tower. They had rented a 2-bedroom unit in the Bracket district, mid-ring, functional, with shared laundry facilities and a small park visible from the kitchen window. Gavrik had transferred to a fixed salary analyst position at Vantage, less prestige, fewer bonuses, regular hours. Solveig's luminous social circle, the women who had gasped over Galactica's shoe at the party, had evaporated like coolant in a vacuum breach. None of them visited the Bracket district, The neighborhood didn't have valet docking. Petra took the money that would have gone into the destroyed trust fund and redirected it. She rented a commercial space on level 6, hired 3 instructors, 2 human, 1 Fatucci, and opened a skills workshop for single mothers and displaced workers. Textile arts, basic accounting, small business fundamentals. She called it the second thimble. On opening day, Gorbo showed up with a banner he had made himself. It read, "Learn to sew and also to succeed," in letters so crooked they looked like they were fleeing the banner. "It's perfect," Petra told him. "Damn right it is." The call came at 0300 on a Tuesday, 6 weeks after the meeting at Aldous' office. Petra was asleep. Her communicator buzzed on the nightstand with Gavrick's name on the screen. "He's here," Gavrick said. His voice sounded scraped raw, like a man who had been awake for 30 hours. "Ludo, born 40 minutes ago, 3.4 kilos. Solveig is exhausted but okay. We're at General Medical, Ward 7. General Medical. Not the private maternity suite at St. Arellan's that Solveig had been planning for months. Ward 7. Standard delivery, shared rooms, the steady soundtrack of other newborns and other families, and the institutional hum of a public hospital doing its honest, unglamorous work. "I'll be there at 0700, Petra said and disconnected. She did not sleep for the rest of the night. She showered, dressed in a sand-colored suit with her copper thimble brooch on the lapel, and packed the box. The same brown paper box from the party, still holding the 3 thermal wraps she had re-washed and pressed. She took a transit pod to General Medical. Ward 7 was everything Prism Tower was not. The corridors were crowded. The lighting was flat and functional. Nurses moved in quick, efficient patterns between rooms, carrying datapads and purpose. Room 214 was a shared space, 2 beds separated by a curtain. On the far side, another young mother was nursing her infant. On the near side, closest to the door, was Solveig. Petra stood in the doorway and took it in. Her daughter lay propped against thin hospital pillows, her dark hair tangled, her face bare of any cosmetic enhancement, the chemical light patterns on her skin so dim they were nearly invisible. She looked exhausted and young, and completely stripped of every pretension she had spent the last decade constructing. Gavrick was folded into a plastic chair in the corner, asleep, his long Shannari legs jutting into the walkway at angles that looked structurally inadvisable. And on Solveig's chest, wrapped in a hospital-issue blanket of aggressively practical grey cotton, was a tiny body. Petra could see the curve of a small head, a wisp of dark hair, skin that was pale with the faintest suggestion of luminescent tracery, not yet active, just potential, like circuits waiting for power. But it was what the baby was wearing underneath the hospital blanket that made Petra stop breathing for 3 full seconds. The seafoam thermal wrap, the one Solveig had dropped on the floor of the observation lounge, the one she had called embarrassing, the one she had dismissed as swap market refuse. It was draped around the infant's body like a cocoon, the golden-tinged alpaca silk blend glowing softly against the baby's skin. Solveig looked up. Her eyes found Petra's and the tears came instantly. Not the performative tears of the lawyer's office, not the manipulative tears of the voicemail messages, but something rawer and less controlled. "It was the only thing that didn't hurt him," Solveig whispered, her voice cracked and thin. "We tried. I bought Galactica newborn suits, 3 of them. The synthetic fiber caused a contact reaction on his skin. He screamed for 20 minutes. The nurses tried the hospital standard issue and that was better, but he kept fussing, kept pulling at it. Then Gavrick remembered." She swallowed. "Gavrick brought the wraps in the hospital bag. I don't even know when he packed them. When we put the green one on him, he stopped crying. He just stopped. He fell asleep in 30 seconds. She touched the edge of the wrap with one trembling finger. "It's so soft, Mom. I never even touched it properly at the party. I just saw the paper wrapping, and I decided it was beneath us." Petra set her box on the metal nightstand. Inside were the ivory and the amber wraps, freshly laundered. She did not say, "I told you so." She had never been that kind of woman, and she was not about to start at 71 in a shared hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and formula. She looked at her grandson, Ludo. He was wrinkled and squashed-looking and impossibly small, with fingers so tiny they seemed theoretical. The luminescent lines on his skin flickered once, a random neural firing, the nurses would say, but Petra chose to read it as a greeting. "He has his grandfather's nose," she said quietly. Solvay's father, Solvay's biological Shenari father, had died when Solvay was 9. Petra had raised her alone after that, selling thread and buttons in a tin can between the stars. Solvay's composure shattered. She cried openly without trying to hide it or frame it, or make it mean anything other than what it was. A woman realizing far too late and at great cost that the hands she had dismissed as old and rough and beneath her were the same hands that had kept her alive, kept her clothed, kept the lights on and the rent paid and the future possible. "Mom, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I turned into someone I don't recognize. I looked at you and all I saw was what I was afraid of being, old and ordinary and invisible. So I ran as far from it as I could, and I surrounded myself with people who made me feel like running was the same as arriving." Gavrik had woken up. He unfolded himself from the plastic chair and stood, rumpled and diminished, looking at Petra with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not deference, not the patronizing politeness he used to deploy like a shield, but something that might have been the very beginning of respect. "Mrs. Millbrook," he said, "I've requested a transfer to the compliance division, fixed salary, no commissions. I've also listed the vehicle for sale and cancelled 3 subscription services I can no longer justify. We're going to learn to live within our actual means." "Good," Petra said, nothing more. "Mom," Solvay reached for her hand, "can you forgive us?" Petra looked at her daughter, half human, half Shenari, fully exhausted, wearing a hospital gown in a shared ward with a baby wrapped in handmade alpaca on her chest. She looked at the thermal wrap glowing softly against infant skin, doing exactly what it had been designed to do, keeping something small and fragile warm in a cold universe. "Forgiveness and finances are separate accounts, Solvay. I will not reopen the credit line. I will not restore the Prism Tower apartment. Your father's trust goes back to the blind administration. The terms stay." She paused. "But I have asked Aldous to open a new education fund in Ludo's name. A percentage of my rental income will go into it monthly. It's for his schooling and nothing else. You and Gavrik will not have access. When he's old enough, he'll decide what to do with it." Solvay nodded. There were no complaints about the conditions, no negotiations. The lesson had been absorbed at the cellular level, which, for a half Shenari, was almost literal. Petra stayed for 2 hours. She held Ludo for 40 minutes of those 2 hours, sitting in the plastic chair that Gavrik surrendered, feeling the negligible weight of a new life against her chest. The alpaca silk blend was warm under her chin. She told Solvay about lactation schedules and how to burp a hybrid infant, slightly different technique than pure human, something to do with the secondary digestive valve, and for the first time in years, her daughter listened without correcting her, without redirecting, without performing. When she left, she kissed Solvay's forehead and placed her hand briefly on Gavrik's shoulder, a gesture so economical it could have meant anything, but he seemed to understand it as the closest thing to acceptance he was going to receive for a long time. The transit pod back to the inner ring was quiet. Petra watched the station's internal geography scroll past the window, commercial levels, residential blocks, maintenance corridors, the whole sprawling organism of metal and air, and people that she had called home for 43 years. She had built something here, not just a shop or a portfolio or a collection of property deeds. She had built the infrastructure that held up other people's lives, and she had done it so quietly that no one noticed until the floor disappeared. She arrived home, unlocked her door, and found Gorbo sitting on her kitchen counter. How he had gotten in was a question she had stopped asking years ago, eating noodles directly from the pot. "So?" he asked, mouthful. "How's the kid?" "Perfect. 3.4 kilos, wearing the seafoam wrap." Gorbo's 3 eyes widened. "The one she threw on the floor?" "The very same. Turns out Galactica's synthetic miracle fiber gives hybrid babies a rash. Who could have predicted?" Gorbo set down his noodles, which was the fettucci equivalent of a standing ovation. "Petra Millbrook, you absolute legend. You didn't even plan that part, did you? That's just the universe having a sense of humor." "The universe doesn't have a sense of humor, Gorbo. It has material science. Alpaca silk is hypoallergenic across 11 species profiles. I checked before I started weaving." "You checked?" I always check. Gorbo shook his head slowly, fur rippling with what she had come to recognize as admiration. You know what your problem is, Petra. You're so far ahead of everyone else that by the time they figure out what happened, you've already moved on to the next stitch. She almost told him about the second Thimble's enrollment numbers. 23 women signed up in the first week, 4 of whom were already showing real talent with interfacing and structural seam work. She almost told him that she had started designing a new thermal wrap for Ludo, this one incorporating a Brevian silk pattern that would shift color with the baby's body temperature, so Solveig could monitor his comfort at a glance without buying one of those obscenely overpriced Galactica biometric monitors. But she was tired, the good kind of tired, the kind that comes from a day that mattered. Get off my counter, Gorbo. In a minute. I want to finish this thought I'm having about franchise locations. Your noodle empire can wait until morning. That's what they said to Cornelius Vanderbilt, and look what happened. Cornelius Vanderbilt didn't cook noodles in other people's kitchens at midnight. You don't know that. History is full of gaps. Petra sat down in her reading chair and closed her eyes. On the table beside her, the copper thimble brooch caught the lamplight. Somewhere across the station, in a 2-bedroom apartment in the Brackett district, a baby slept in a handmade wrap that glowed like a small sun. Somewhere on level 6, a workshop full of sewing machines waited for tomorrow's students. Somewhere in a blind trust administered by a 78-year-old lawyer, a lifetime of accumulated leverage sat quietly, patient as thread on a bobbin waiting to be useful. There was no happily ever after. There was Solveig, who had broken something that would take years to repair, and who would have to earn back trust the way her mother had earned everything else, one stitch at a time, with no shortcuts and no brand names. There was Gavrik, who would either grow into the man his son needed or he wouldn't, and Petra had learned a long time ago that you could not weave someone else's spine for them. There was Ludo, who had entered the universe wearing a garment made by hands that had been dismissed as worthless, and who would grow up, if Petra had anything to say about it, understanding the difference between cost and value. And there was Petra Millbrook, 71 years old, owner of 6 commercial properties and a textile shop and a brand new skills workshop, drinking ginger tea in a station that had been spinning in the dark for 2 centuries, doing what she had always done, holding things together, not because anyone asked, not because anyone noticed, but because that was what the thread was for.